CSAC Institute is hosting this, and many of you have taken our courses. The Institute is designed to provide professional development for county managers, executives, and elected officials. And these webinars are one way for us to provide those in this interim until we are able to resume classes. Joining me today for our conversation about strengthening resiliency is Dr. Mary Kirlin. Mary is a consultant and a recently retired professor and chair of a program at Sacramento State University. Please join me in welcoming Mary.
Hi there. Glad to be here.
That was extensive. So I don't know about you, but there are times when I've just been feeling lost, overwhelmed, anxious, feel like I need to be doing something, but I'm not sure what it is, and I feel pressure that we should be doing something, making decisions, and not exactly sure what. What brings me back, though, is remembering to focus on a couple things. Remembering to focus on my purpose for both me personally as well as, in my case, CSAC Institute, but for whom I'm providing the services on behalf. Being mindful of the reality that we're all living in, and reminding myself that I don't need to be doing this by myself, that there are others that should be involved and that need to be involved in doing the things that I'm doing. That sometimes we need to slow down to speed up. There's the temptation in a crisis to make sweeping changes and take drastic action. And sometimes we put that pressure on ourselves, and oftentimes other people, the people we work with, put that pressure on us. We're facing these looming threats. People are grieving, they're anxious, they're uncomfortable, we feel like we've lost our sense of control of what's happening in it, and it drives us to do things fast. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's something to think about. And that's the topic of our conversation today, is slowing down to speed up. And how do we strengthen resilience? How can we learn from our experience so far in this unprecedented crisis, and how can we apply that to some of the things that we are doing now and we will be doing in the future? When we think of resilience, I think there are three elements of resilience that we think about. One is our human ability to recover and recover quickly. Second is that our ability to not be overwhelmed. And third is not acting hastily or making reckless or unwise decisions. Last week, for those of you who were able to participate with Larry Kiley and Rich Callahan, we talked about being readiness, both personal readiness and team readiness, and how it builds and starts to strengthen resiliency and our ability to recover from crises such as we're in today. Today, we're going to build on what Larry and Rich talked about on readiness by explaining strategies and aspects to continue to strengthen our resilience, particularly around purpose, acceptance of reality, and building agile teams. Because in the end, it's not just about returning to the basis where we started, because we know that's not going to happen. It's about ultimately building something better. So what is that? Well, all of us know the triumvirate of crises we're dealing with today, of social unrest, of the public health crisis, and this growing financial crisis. But what do we think that next normal might look like? And we wanted your input on that. We wanted you to think a little bit about what are some of the elements of the next normal that you're thinking of, that there might be in there. And we'd like you to use the chat feature. So if you would, think a little bit about some of the things that are on your mind about what counties might see in the next normal. They might be big things. They might be little things. They may be things that we're going to need to do in the short term. There may be things that we are going to be more permanent part of the next normal. What are some of the things that you're seeing out there?
We're going to let these populate for a bit, so I encourage you folks to read along in the chat box. If you haven't opened it up, as soon as you click on chat, it should open up for you, and you have some options about where to read it on your screen. Retirements. That's an interesting one. I'm going to take notes on this because part of what's interesting to me about seeing what people are thinking about is honestly the different perspectives. It's one of the benefits of CSAC is we get a different way to think about, what are different people worrying about. So lots of attention to what's going to happen, how many things are going to happen online. Outsourcing is an interesting idea. There may be some more of that. Earlier retirements. People
reduce services.
Yes, certainly budget cuts. So the need to reduce service and budget cuts. Training new people over Zoom. That's an interesting idea.
Well, and with retirements is going to be a lot of new people moving into senior roles who may or may not have been prepared, because I think a lot, we're already seeing people retiring.
Mm-hmm. This can be stuff that you're worried about in your more immediate sphere as well. Fatigue. Somebody's bound to say Zoom fatigue.
But it's true. Somebody's talking about their EOC duties, but many of us are working on the public health crisis well outside our area. We know people from library services are training to be tracking specialists and so forth.
We're also encouraging you to participate because it's a way for you to start thinking about what's going to be coming up in the next several weeks, months, and probably even years as you move forward. So, Bill introduced this idea of resilience today, and he talked about one way to define it is our ability to recover from disruptive change. And it's more than disruptive change, bouncing back to a baseline. It's getting back to something that's different. So I want you to hold that idea of disruptive change and being able to come forward as you think about resilience today. So if you were on the webinar last week, you heard Laurie and Rich talk about the idea of characteristics of resilient organizations, and they're up on the screen. I'm not going to read them, but we're going to talk about number one in just a moment. And we've started to try to introduce you to the idea of number two. What does it really mean to look out and be realistic about what's coming? Sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's not so exciting. And one of the characteristics of people who are really resilient is they're willing to sort of look out and say, okay, here's what I think is going to, potentially be coming down the pipe. Numbers 3 and 4 are really more about how you individually manage you and your team. And Rich and Laurie talked about those qualities last week. And then in future seminars, we're going to be talking more about those elements. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time on those today. And then the last one is one that Bill hinted at in the introduction, which is how do you put together your folks into teams that are agile and really able to move to address these things that are creating so much uncertainty in organizations. So as we talk about what resilience means, the first thing for me is always, what does it mean to have people sort of be resilient in the moment? So we wanted to, again, get you thinking a little bit, and we're going to put you into some breakout groups and ask you to think about where in your county have you seen people being resilient, sort of stepping up, accepting that things are different, filling gaps, behaving differently. And part of this is the flip side of all the challenges we're facing. If you want to encourage people to be resilient, one of the ways you can do that is start noticing it and calling it out and acknowledging that that's really what's happening. So Bill's going to put you into some groups and give you some instructions about how we want you to manage this part of the session.
Right. So we'll be in groups of 7, and and you'll have 12 minutes for this. And we'd like you to think about the question that you see in red there, and for each group to identify 2 specific examples to share, and then appoint a spokesperson. Now, during your group, you'll see in the top of your little screen, you'll see a little blue countdown clock so you can keep an eye on timing. And then when we come back in the large group, I'm going to ask the people who are spokespeople to raise their hands. And the way you raise your hand is click on the participant box, and you'll see a little blue hand, and just punch that, and that way Mary and I will know who the spokespeople are. We'd like to hear a couple examples of, as Mary said, of what have you seen, both in your own experience or in other people that you admired, where they're practicing some of these attributes of resilience that we've talked about today and Rich and Laurie talked about last week. So Elizabeth is going to put us into breakouts and enjoy the conversation.
So in our team, we talked about a variety of different ways that we remained resilient, such as pivoting formats. So a lot of our departments pivoted to online. So social media, Facebook, websites. We also reached out to radio stations, newspapers. The library did a letter writing campaign to reach our patrons. And then we talked about how our IT teams really helped pivot the telecommuting overnight, basically, of, okay, we're going to do this. Let's figure it out, and creating policy, getting equipment into the hands of the staff that needed it, ensuring that the VPNs and everything could handle the additional traffic from being at home. And then staff was also repurposed. So just because your job was normally an accountant doesn't mean that that's what you're going to do now. So you might be a contract tracer, or contacting seniors, or working on economic development for small businesses. So having that flexibility within staff and was essential. And then policy changes, such as implementing e-signatures or adjusting purchasing authorities to make sure that we could still do the business of government, even though we weren't necessarily in the same spot.
Great. Thank you, Elsie. Michael.
Hello there. So Elsie, we had a lot of the same stuff that you did too, which I kind of figured. But one of the things that I know Santa Cruz mentioned is in like their adult services program, their staff are continuing to do their regular jobs while also staffing in the homeless shelters. We saw a lot of the tech tools, like in Marin, being able to see staff or see clients and stuff using GoToMeeting or VC or Zoom. In Shasta County, we saw the same thing. We also saw some use of old technology, people using phone calls and letters to clients to be able to communicate with them. And then also, if they had to bring documents that they would normally bring into the office for scanning or otherwise proof of something, they would use a text message and take a photo of the document and transmit it that way. Shasta also saw electronic signatures come into use, so we got a contract with DocuSign and just started using electronic signatures. And then both Glenn and Shasta saw our board meetings go to an online format and accepting comments online.
Yeah, that's been an interesting challenge for every local government, is to figure out how to bring their meetings online and manage the public. Leslie.
So a lot of the same kinds of things. The overall theme, I think, is people just really stepped up. They jumped in to do whatever it took. So I'm in the HR department now, and our team was extremely impressive in jumping on these new leave laws, pulling together information as, digesting it and interpreting it and disseminating information to employees. We had a lot of FAQs put together quickly. We had a COVID-19 landing page on our intranet. So that was really impressive. The other thing is employees doing things that they don't normally do, and in many times they've never had any exposure to it. So we did in San Luis Obispo County, we put together a alternative care site at Cal Poly. It was up and running or ready to run in 2 weeks, and we onboarded over 300 medical volunteers and trained them. The person training them had never done really any safety things at all. And she's teaching them donning and doffing. And so it was quite impressive. We all spoke about communication and how I think it struck all of us that communication really stepped up. There was a lot more communication. Decisions were being made quickly and communicated transparently, more so than had been in the past. The director, I believe it's Sonoma County, one of the executives there would do an end of the day recap every day, sharing information of what's going on. And that hadn't really been done before all this hit. So, and then the final thing was technology. So that people could continue to serve the public and also work as teams. In San Luis Obispo County, we were just in the process of rolling out Microsoft Teams when this hit, and we all learned how to use it very quickly, and now we love it. We want to keep using it. And the other folks said the same thing. Technology was utilized really well. There's still some folks out there that are resistant to learning new technology and using technology. But for the most part, people jumped in.
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's going to be part of the next normal is the technology, whether it's Teams or others, is going to be part of our culture going forward. How about one more, Shamise?
So most of the things that have already been brought up, we did discuss as well. We did talk about how kind of everybody had a newfound sense of purpose. There was kind of the need to rise to the challenge and adapt quickly. And if that was somebody doing a different task and working a different schedule in the EOC than they normally did, or if that was teleworking. We had one county who said they were kind of a little bit later in adapting to teleworking, but it sounded like they put it together in a really well-organized process for employees, providing them with lots of direction, policies, procedures, guidance, even like a goodie tool kit bag to help them easily, transition to that process, as well as assigning them, supervisors that checked in with them regularly through, Zoom and other methods that kind of help them stay connected when they might not normally have done that. So that kind of seemed like the overall theme. We did talk about people adapting, to new technology and to, more electronic processes. In my county, my payroll officer has been working remotely since early March. So we've kind of had to, really reformat how our payroll process works. It's been effective and actually provides some efficiency. So I think that's one of the surprises that maybe we weren't all anticipating, was that actually teleworking is in some cases more efficient, and actually is obviously something that will be considered going forward when we hopefully get back to some type of normalcy, that maybe we will be looking at more teleworking, and that may have different spatial requirements for the actual, physical infrastructure. So I think in our office, we were forced to go paperless almost very quickly, which we wanted to do, but we thought it was going to take us years to do. So it's been, there's been some good opportunities, even though it's been stressful, but it's been a good opportunity.
Well, that's a perfect place to transition. Shamise started off by talking about what she'd seen was a shift in purpose. And one of the very first things that we want to talk about in the sort of how do you take advantage and be resilient in these times is to really make sure that everybody's focused on purpose. And as you think about purpose, one of the primary goals is, can you keep that in front of your people at all times? And as I listened to the conversation about the examples of resilience, I noticed a couple of things. First of all, you shifted as you needed to, so that people were making on-the-spot changes and doing things quickly, so that they could really step up and be and achieve the purpose. And nobody really talked about doing that deliberately, but that's part of what part of what I heard when I listened to you guys reporting out. I also heard you talking about making changes in policy really quickly, and I didn't hear it explicitly, but one of the things that I'm hoping that did happen is that you began to see that when you tried something and it didn't work, you were clear about where it needed to get. And so even if it was imperfect, or somebody might say failed, or you made a mistake, you just kept working to get it to be what it needed to be. The only way you can do that is if you're really, really clear about your organization's purpose. What is it that we need to do to be able to make sure that people get the services and the outcomes that we're trying to get? So those of you who have taken a class from me have heard me talk about the centrality of purpose. We've got a few notes for you here about how to think about it. And what I'd like to do is take this time to say, in a breakout group, can you, having now been through the last 3 months of really having to focus on what's important, can you articulate what it is that is core? And it's probably at the department level, not at the unit level, but what is it that you folks as a team are trying to get done? And then we'll come back and talk about how do you use that purpose to drive innovation and support resilience.
What we'd like you to do in this next breakout, and there's just going to be 3 of you in this breakout, because we want you to be thinking about purpose. I mean, one of the things, as Mary was talking about, that we know about resilient organizations, and you heard all sorts of awesome stories about people stepping up and doing new things and trying things that we've never done before, and people taking on tasks that they've had no training for but would just jump in, is that core of purpose and tying everything that you do to that purpose, because that's what is sustainable about resilience. Because now we're entering this period and a crisis where we're getting exhausted, and there's no end in sight. And so how do you keep that creativity and that energy and that enthusiasm going? And part of it is being able to continually talk about what is it that we're doing. So what we'd like you to do in your small groups is for each of you to take 1 minute and to explain to the 2 other people in your group, what is the purpose of your department or your program or the county or whatever it is that is core to what you do. This is that elevator speech of this is why we do what we do. And it's not about describing processes. Mm-hmm. It's not describing how you do things. It's what are the outcomes? What is the purpose of what you do? From the perspective of the person to whom you're providing that service. It might be an internal service that you're providing to other county employees. It might be something that you're providing to the community. And it may be that the community is indirectly benefiting from their service. But what is the purpose of your department? So once you go in the breakout groups, each person take 1 minute to describe it. And then the other 2 people who are listening, tell that person what you heard and how they could make that statement of purpose even more meaningful to the people who are impacted by whatever your purpose is. Okay, so we're going to give you 10 minutes for this. And again, you'll be in very small groups, so each person gets a chance to practice this and get some feedback on how you talk about purpose.
I'm going to leave you with one example. Caltrans used to say that their goal, their purpose was to build and maintain highways. At some point along the line, some wise person said, really, our purpose is to try to ensure the efficient movement of people and goods. So, if your purpose is to fill potholes and build roads, you're going to measure your success on how much of that you do. If your purpose is to make sure that people and goods are moving efficiently, not having potholes is part of it, having enough capacity is part of it, but you're going to think about it really differently. And part of what I heard as you talked about the resilient behavior and the kinds of things that people were doing is they sort of got refocused on what you're trying to achieve rather than all the mechanisms that help or hurt you along the way. So that crystallizing to what are we trying to do is the goal.
So again, your assignment is in your small groups is to take a moment, up to a minute, to share what your purpose is in terms of outcomes and the reason you exist, the value you're adding, and to get feedback from your two colleagues. So Elizabeth, let's go into our breakouts. I sat in on one or two sessions. It was really interesting listening because, and I'll use, I hope Pamela doesn't mind, but she was using her example as a real estate agent for the county. And that one thing that, a number of things she said resonated with those of us in the group, but one thing she said is, you know, that I'm looking for shelters and homes for homeless people to get them off the street. And really that's the purpose, is improving the quality of life for people is really the purpose we're doing. And she was making a comment at the end, and we got cut off, that that it's exhausting work. She was talking about, now I have to go find polling places, it's exhausting work. But part of the comment I was making earlier, because I get that, I said that at the beginning, I sometimes am just feeling exhausted, is remembering the purpose, remembering that somebody tonight is going to be in a shelter or in a warm or a cool bed, depending on where you are in the state, because of the work you did. And you'll never meet that person, and they'll never meet you, but somebody's quality of life improved just a little bit because of the work you did. And I think that's the importance for all of us to be tying our work to purpose, that even when we're exhausted, even when we're frustrated, even when we feel lost or anxious, is remembering that we're doing things for other people, and that there are people whose lives are improved, whose jobs are improved, whose work is improved because of the little contributions that we do. And I think that's what Mary was saying before we took the break, becomes so critical in strengthening resilience around knowing the purpose that we're doing. And it's not about process, it's about these kinds of outcomes.
Well, and I think in our group, we had two people who are on what I call internal service departments. And I said at the state, we used to call those control agencies, and it was not a nice term. But the idea is, those of you who are doing internal services, it's even harder to remind yourself that, if you're doing the budget, or you're doing accounting, or you're doing HR, you really are supporting the real estate agent who's going to go through the rigmarole of finding a place to purchase so that somebody sleeps better. So it's even another layer removed. But the more you and you as a leader can remind folks around you about that connection to purpose, it helps. I'd say it helps on two fronts. It reminds people of the importance of the work that they're doing, but as a tool to get people to think differently, it takes the focus away from Bill Chiat's tasks today and shifts it to, what is the Institute trying to do? Where's Bill's contribution? Where's my contribution? And all of us are thinking about, well, how do we improve the Institute, rather than saying, well, Bill, let's take a look at your to-do list. And I think the default for us is, again, those tasks or the processes. The more you can hone in on purpose and, drive it home, every meeting, every agenda, everything you undertake, find a way to remind people of what that connection is. And eventually people will be much more comfortable with you using that to make decisions, to remind people about what they're trying to do. And then it's also freeing, because it's a team effort trying to improve something. And if I need to step back, if what I'm doing maybe is somewhat, less helpful, it's not about me not doing a good job. It's us trying to achieve something. And I'm saying, gee, could we not do this? So it's very powerful, but it has to be intentional, and you have to do it really self-consciously for a long time to build that sense of purpose within your organization. Use the same words over and over and over and over again. Do not change the words, because people won't follow you. One of the best ways to see if you've got a clear sense of purpose is just pull all the sort of strategic plan, priorities, messaging documents from the last year or 18 months and see if there's any consistency at all. In Yolo County, when we combined the Health and Human Services Agency, we spent a long time trying to figure out sort of what that bundle of new entities did. And we wound up with a really simple, they try to ensure the health, safety, and economic stability, not security, but stability, economic stability of their residents. And we just kept coming back to those words over and over. And today, before I got on the call, I double checked and they're still using that same statement because everybody can link to it. So be consistent about your language and just use it over and over.
And Mary, part of this, especially for those of you who are in supervisorial roles, is about coaching your subordinates around purpose and aligning the purpose of your organization with individuals' purposes. Remember, I said that, I realized that about myself too. What do I see as my individual purpose? How does that line up with the purpose of the organization? And I just posted in chat one of our tip sheets that you're welcome to download on building around purpose and how to coach others around purpose. Because one thing we know from the research, and there's been some interesting work done by Gallup and others, is that people are going to feel much more connected with their workplace and productive in their workplace when they can connect purpose to the work that they do, when they realize that the piece that they do, even if it's as challenging as Pamela was talking about, trying to find space for yet another polling place, to keep aligning that around purpose and knowing the contribution makes people feel more engaged and ties into them. Conversely, and I think Frank Bennis has talked about this in his classes, when people don't see a connection between their what they do and the purpose of the organization, where their contribution is, they become disengaged and their productivity drops significantly.
And we were hoping to have you share them. So if you want to pop them into the chat window as we go along, that would be great. And Bill, if you can go to the the 5 topic slide, that would be great. There we go. So we've tried to ground you a little bit in sort of the idea of purpose and how to focus on that. We talked at the beginning a little bit about what the reality of your situation is. Again, 3 and 4 really are a little bit separate. We're going to come back to them at the end. Yep. And we want to talk a little bit about how to take that purpose, take that sort of reality that you face, and really help your people rise to the occasion.
Yeah, once you're clear and understand purpose and the reality that you're in, it's really then about taking advantage of these agile teams. Now, many of you were sharing earlier today, it was so cool, about how you pulled people together from across disciplines to do things, whether it was figure out how to do electric signatures, or for those of you in the clerk's office, figuring out how to do virtual marriages, all sorts of things from across counties that we were able to bring teams together. And that's something that we hope we learn and carry forward, that we don't lose that agility, that enthusiasm for bringing people together. One of the things I marvel at California counties about, even unlike other counties in the country, is we're in so many different businesses. I mean, most counties have 26, 30 different departments doing amazing cross-section of services that are completely unrelated to each other. You don't see this in cities, you don't see this in districts, and you certainly don't see it in most other counties in the country. So it's an advantage to us to be in so many businesses, because it also means we have this awesome diversity of people that have all sorts of different experiences and expertise and perspectives. The diversity is amazing. So one of the things we know about resilient organizations is they figure out, how do we bring those people together? And you'll see in the middle here that they're able to work beyond the hierarchy of bosses or the structure of the organization to be able to bring in people, it doesn't matter where, bring in somebody from the sheriff's department, somebody from the ag commissioner, somebody from behavioral health, wherever those people are that need to come together. It does two things. One, it takes advantage of this rich resource. But I think secondly, particularly when people are in a crisis mode as we've been, employees feel more valued when their expertise is being tapped to do things that are outside of what they would normally do. And somebody used the example of the contact tracers, of somebody who's got some good investigative skills, like a librarian, is being able to apply them at someplace else. So it comes back to purpose and contribution, but also that employees are being valued beyond what their job classification is or what their typical job is. And we know that some of the characteristics you see on your screen are what make these agile teams work successfully and build resilience in an organization, because they're biased for speed and action. They're able to take some calculated risks, and we'll talk more about this at a later class, but how do you take these calculated risks and try some experiments to see if something works, and try to do it quickly? Because when you try to do experiment, when teams are able to do experiments and something doesn't work, as often is the case, you're able to quickly shift and correct, learn from that, and do something different. Teams like this, though, also have to build trust. The team members have to learn to be able and be comfortable with questioning each other, disagreeing with each other, and problem solving together. And it means that they need to be empowered to make decisions, to remove obstacles, reconfigure systems and services. All those are part of these kinds of teams being able to function well. They may not be, in many cases, they're not ongoing teams. There's something that comes together to a problem, works together to resolve that problem, is able to access the experts around the organization to bring them in, either as members of the team or as resource people on the team, to help the teams be successful.
I think, Bill, to this question of experts, we don't, especially in government, we get focused on the box that they live in on the org chart, or the credential that they have as the people being experts. I spent some time at the Department of Education, and because I didn't have a teaching credential, I would often get, literally shut out of conversations, which was not particularly helpful. I had other skills that I could bring to the table. And so when we talk about, how do you include quote experts, really what we're trying to encourage you to do is think, maybe who has skill sets that you haven't identified, who can you sort of spread a little bit, who can you help to grow with this assignment, and part of what I like about what we've just been through is, hopefully, if you think back a little bit, people have stepped up and done stuff that you maybe wouldn't have expected, or they've demonstrated skills that you didn't know that they had, and it's a perfect sort of incubator for you to say, wow, how do I do that going forward? How do I really make sure that I'm tapping people who have expertise and not just going down the dreaded food chain in the hierarchy, because that will get you more and more stilted, narrow views. And you really want to encourage this broader use of people who really know what's going on. It might be the person at the front line, or it might be somebody in a different department who says, oh, look what I stumbled upon. So how do you find those people who really have that expertise to bring them into your teams?
Yeah, if you're looking at Chiat, Cynthia Lark, I hope I pronounced that right, said a couple things that are important. Having a lot of these conversations with your employees about what else can you do? Mm-hmm. What other expertise that we never tapped before in your job, but happen to have that expertise. And asking, I think she also pointed out, how can you grow from this? So thinking about starting to have those conversations, because unless you ask, and oftentimes no one ever tells you. I remember working with the Public Works Department, and we had a street superintendent who was having some challenges until we found out that he also was a soccer coach and had all these skills, coaching skills, that he wasn't being put to use and hadn't even thought about how to use in approaching employees, rather than in a hierarchical approach, but to use a coaching approach. The same thing he used with his kids in soccer changed the way he did his job completely. I think a couple other things too is, and I think this was a trend happening before the COVID crisis happened to us, but thinking multidisciplinary and even multi-jurisdictional. A lot of our homeless teams, these agile homeless teams, were already doing that and figuring out how do we work with the cities, how do we work with our nonprofit and religious-based organizations to think outside of that box, but also interdisciplinary within the county. Being a park naturalist by training is thinking ecosystem, not just a particular process, that you can't just extract a particular process. Some of you know I use the example of a spider web, is if you mess around with one strand of a spider web, the whole thing is going to move. So being able to think more broadly and think about consequences of the different actions you're doing. And I think the beauty of using agile teams like this is not only are they motivated and excited and they feel like they're making a contribution, but they're able to do some experiments quickly. Instead of taking 6 months to change a procurement system, they took 3 days to change a procurement system and try it and be able to pivot when something isn't working. 2 other things this requires that occurred to me as Mary was talking. One is the team needs a clear mandate of what is their purpose. What are the guardrails? What is it that they're supposed to, problem they're supposed to solve? And that's clear from everybody on the team. They have a shared vision of what it is. And then secondly, particularly for those of you that might charter the team, is that you need to give them support, but get out of the way. And that's what we talked about with the hierarchy of bosses, is let them do things and let them try some new things and be innovative and be able to try those ideas. That's what's going to make this work. And the advice somebody once told me is, particularly for those of you that are in supervisorial roles, is listen with humility. Don't assume that you know the right answer.
And I would say, I want to just tag on really quickly to Bill's point. Some of us, I'll fess up, love being asked to think outside the box. And part of what I appreciate is that I go in and I have sort of outsider stupid questions that are sometimes really helpful questions. I love things that are new and exciting and different. Be sensitive to the fact that for some people, you'll just scare the bejesus out of them. And some people are uncomfortable with what they don't know. And so you want to encourage those people, open the doors for the people like me who say, sure, what do you want me to think about now? But also realize for some people, they might have really good observations, but they're afraid to say them. They feel like they're not the expert. So not everybody's going to jump into those settings really quickly. It's on you to sort of facilitate that and help people along.
So this is a chance, while this is fresh in your mind, this is not something you need to put into chat, but just in your notes someplace, who are some people you need to talk to tomorrow, this afternoon, that might be some talent that you can tap? How can you find out some of this? I think it was Cynthia said, they found out that the boyfriend of one of my employees works for Zoom, and suddenly we had a Zoom expert who could help us. So where are some people that you might be able to tap? Or again, to Cynthia's questions, who are some people I should really sit down and ask them, what else can you do? What other skills do you have that we haven't taken advantage of that you might want to contribute? Make some notes so that you can do some of these conversations this afternoon or tomorrow or Monday or whenever you see those people again. So hopefully you've got a couple ideas. And they may be in other departments and you may need to sit down and talk with other people, but take advantage of the rich resources we have. And it doesn't matter the size of the county. We have rich resources throughout, or resources we can connect with, and that's part of building resilience, is using those resources. When people feel they're being put to work, that they're of value, that they're making a contribution, they are going to be energized, they're going to feel committed, and they're going to have passion and intensity for what they're doing. Particularly now when some people are being activated more than others as different services are opened or closed. How can we take advantage of those people who may not be being used as much as they want to be used, and taken and involved.
Yeah, and really think about, again, really reflect on the last couple of months. You've had lots of opportunity to see people step up. A lot of folks have had to cross train and, step into roles that they aren't used to. Really keep a pulse on that. And to the extent that conversation is, positive or neutral, keep moving it in that direction. If people are like, oh, that was kind of cool. If you feel like they feel energized about it, that's great. And if if it seems like people are treating it as a stress and they can't wait to get to back to what's normal, see what you can do to sort of tamp that down a little bit and try to, well, what's cool about it, highlight the interesting things. Because I think part of what you want to do coming out of this is not necessarily return to normal. If you're going to be resilient, you want to be able to pull these groups together on not a moment's notice, but pretty quickly, and have people be pretty comfortable just diving in and trying things. And that then creates a culture where people are willing to try to change more, they're willing to experiment, and it should be freeing for a lot of the organization. So you want to really sort of consciously reflect on what's happened, encourage it, and do what you can to build on it, rather than saying, well, when we get back to normal, and see what you can do to sort of make it part of a new normal rather than something to be avoided.
Mary, so I'm seeing a number of comments in the chat too about, that reminds me, and many of you have heard me say this, that exercising leadership is a above the neck and a below the neck function. We've been talking a lot of above the neck things here, but this is also below the neck. It's about the heart and how people are feeling. And I think I'm seeing more and more about exercising compassionate leadership, creating an environment where people can have conversations about exactly what Mary has just talked about, is that the normal we were all experiencing in January and February is not coming back. It's going to be a different normal. And people are in varying places in the grieving process of denial and anger, bargaining, and depression, and then eventually acceptance. And maybe even some people argue there's a sixth step in the grieving process, which is seeing a new, and it's really, I think, about resiliency, seeing a better end than the beginning of the process. But part of this is just creating an environment where you can have these conversations and just let people talk about how they're feeling. I think that second bullet in the slide you're seeing is about building trust, is that it's okay to have these conversations. It's okay for me to tell you, as I did at the beginning of this webinar, that sometimes I feel lost and overwhelmed and not sure what I should be doing. And people need to know that, because we're all feeling the same things, and talking about it is part of that compassionate leadership that builds the trust that allows these kinds of teams to happen, and for people to realize how they can make a contribution. But it's also this second bullet about this staunch acceptance of reality, that this is the reality that we're in, and that reality is not going to change, no matter how much we hope it will go away.
And I think part of all of the stuff that we've been talking about, we've sort of been telling you where you want to get and why it's useful. And that really means at the end, it comes back really to you. And, Bill, you can go to our second to last slide. What are the tools that you can take away as a leader, whether you are an informal leader with a group in your unit, or whether you're a more formal leader in a leadership position. All of you have opportunities to help people through this change. And I think I go back to, a lot of you have been exposed to change management theory, and one of the first thing, if you want to do a big change, is what? Create a sense of urgency. Well, you can check that box. We have created a sense of urgency. All kinds of things have shifted very, very quickly. And then when you think, so it's a blessing. Count it as a blessing. It is what it is. You really have that opportunity with all that uncertainty and unsettledness to really do some cool things. But for you as an individual, that means you really got to be intentional. And that means, kudos to you for taking an hour and a half out of your day to step back and think about this stuff. The title of this was sort of, we put it together and it was sort of, clunky, but it really is. part of the way you're going to lead best is if you slow down and think about the stuff we've been talking about today. How do I connect purpose all the time that I talk to people? Who am I not tapping effectively? Where are those models of resilience that I really want to continue to facilitate? You have to think backwards about what's been happening and then forward about how you continue to put those changes into place in order for you to be a more effective leader during this time.
Yeah, and I think as Michael Conti has mentioned in the chat, this is the grieving process is not linear, nor is the process we're going to be following to whatever this next normal is. It is going to be a roller coaster, and thrown in the middle of all this, we have a major election. And so, being able to keep having these conversations, but also for you to get, as we've often said, get up on the balcony, step away from the chaos you're dealing with, and as you've been doing, I hope, for the last hour and a half, and to look at what's going on, to try to interpret what's happening, and look for alternate interpretations for what you're seeing, and recognize that everyone is going through this in a different way and is going to process it in a different way. And that's why I think that compassionate piece of the leadership is important in getting people to accept the reality that we're in and will continue to be in for a while, and be able to move on to better things. Again, it comes back to what Mary and I have been saying, is tying it to purpose. Why do we do what we do? Why do counties exist? Why does your program exist? And being parts of teams that can help make a difference. Everything is not as urgent as it seems. Sometimes we put ourselves in positions where we're taking action or making decisions when we don't need to, when you have time to wait, when you have time to slow down, when you have time to process. So be mindful of that when you're making decisions. We're in a world now where we're going to be making decisions with imperfect information, when we may only have 95% of the information, but for much of what we do, that may be sufficient. And I'm reminded about Eisenhower's comment that it's not about the plans, it's about the planning and the sense-making that goes into the decisions you make that's really important. I wanted to, and we wanted to leave a couple minutes for questions or comments that we want to share. But for 3 and 4 on here, that's going to be our sessions, new sessions next month. And those are going to, we'll open registration for those in a week or so. But those are going to be on July 16th, 23rd, and 30th. So also Thursdays at 3 o'clock. On Thursday, July 16th, Dr. Frank Bennis, who I know has been with us today, is going to be talking about adaptive leadership in the new normal. So he's going to be talking about some of the value, the interpersonal recognition and interpersonal relationships that you see here. On Thursday, July 3rd, Dr. Larry Liberty is going to be talking about living and leading in chaotic times, and thinking in particular about how do you manage your own stress and the stress of those around you. And then finally, on Thursday, July 30th, bookends to our webinar series, Dr. Larry Kiley and Dr. Rich Callahan are coming back with Beyond Survival. So we're excited about those, and they pick up these other elements of resiliency, which have really been the theme for all of our webinars. And now, before we adjourn, we have Mary, anything else you wanted to add to that? Before we...
I think it's one connection for those of you who listened to the first webinar. Larry talks pretty adamantly and forcefully, and I think very effectively, about resilience and readiness. And I think Bill and I, we chatted about this a little bit earlier. We probably use them a little more interchangeably. So, when we think about resilience, we think about the ability to come back, which does incorporate a lot of what Larry would call readiness. And she does a great job of talking about, how do you think ahead about what's going to happen? So if you hear that language being used somewhat differently, don't be put off by it. I think we're actually trying to link these 6 seminars couple them a little more tightly than we're normally able to. And we're happy to have that happen. So just a quick note about that.
So if you have comments or questions, there's quite a bit of interesting, and we'll transcribe the chat. But a number of things people are pointing out, that there's no going back. The state has made changes. Cynthia again shared that her mentor always told her that if I can sleep on something, you're better off. I've learned that about myself too. I, for whatever reason, come up with my most brilliant ideas at 2:37 in the morning. But yeah, I think that's all part of some of the comments, some of our thinking in the ideas that we're sharing. Other comments or questions people have? Cynthia just added self-care, and I think Larry's going to talk a lot about that next month. This is about as much about leading yourself as it is about leading other people, and you can't exercise leadership with other people if you can't exercise leadership over yourself. And part of that is taking care of yourself. And Mary and I often talk about the importance for you to find confidants of people who aren't your significant other and probably aren't an employee, but somebody that you can talk with, maybe a fellow participant in the webinar today, just to bounce ideas off, talk about how you're feeling, talk about where you're at today, because as many of you are commenting, this is a roller coaster, and you're going to feel great. You're going to feel like you're making progress on your purpose today, and then something's going to happen tomorrow that is going to make you feel exhausted. And that's where, going back to the roots that we've talked about today, the purpose, what you're trying to accomplish becomes so important, and helping those around you becomes so important.
I think especially with all the uncertainty that we have, keeping yourself grounded, not in a way that's artificial, but in a way that creates some stability, being able to be honest about how unsettling this is, but not freak people out, not add their boss to the list of people they need to be worried about and take care as part of that balance. So how are you honest and supportive, but also supportive of them in a way that helps them feel a little bit calmer in the uncertainty, or just uncomfortable, all the uncomfortableness of uncertainty. Okay, this is the way it's going to be. So how do we get more comfortable with, we don't know? So finding a balance for you as a leader is absolutely critical.
Yeah. And Frank Bennis reminds us that, especially those of you that are creating teams, is remember to let go. Let them be clear on what the mandate is, clear on what the purpose is, but then let go. Encourage them, enable them, support them, recognize them, but move out of the way. And you might be amazed with some of the results.
And one of the ways you can do that is really support the things that they try. Not only the things that they are successful at, but wow, it took 6 efforts to get that right. If you don't reinforce the fact that that it's not perfect out of the shot every time, people will go back to being nervous. So really support that. Yeah.
I would also encourage on agile teams. Carl Weissek talks about this. Mary and I disagree on how to pronounce his last name, but he's a professor at the University of Michigan, and probably one of the premier organizational theorists in the country, if not the world. Talks about the importance of small wins, and I think that's a piece of these agile teams, is not to overwhelm them with a massive project they're trying to address, but break it down into small things that they can do. That he talks about. Can you do things in 2-week increments? So let's plan for a small win in 2 weeks, and then the next small win in 2 weeks, and then the next small win in 2 weeks. Because a couple of things. One, people feel better when they have wins. And for the dissenters, when things start making progress, their dissension starts to go away. But the second thing is, as Mary and I have talked about today, is if something doesn't work well, and things aren't going to always work out right, it's a small thing, and you can backtrack, fix it. I think Angela talked about redo the plan, do, check, act, and then try something else relatively quickly in a matter of days. And so also be encouraging these teams not to look at the huge pictures, because if you give people too big a problem, they're going to feel overwhelmed and feel like they can't do it. So how can they break that down into small steps that start making incremental progress? And I think the best example I've seen are in those counties that have made some significant progress on homelessness in their communities. Many of them has been successful because they took small pieces and started working at those. San Mateo worked on veterans first. Other counties have picked other things to work on, and instead of trying to solve the entire problem, is break it into small wins. I think that's where we start seeing success with teams.
And even with those small wins, you can keep tying them back to purpose, and that will help people see, you know, you don't achieve purpose overnight, you achieve purpose through layer of doing things. Yeah.
And I'll say one other thing in closing. Many of you are going to be having difficult conversations and having to make some very difficult decisions in the weeks and months to come, whether they're budget related or service related. We have some tough decisions to make ahead of us. I think one of the keys for first of all, be transparent to your employees. Tell them what's going on. Remember what Relly Nadler says in our emotional intelligence classes, that silence is a message, and people fill silence with the worst possible outcomes. Tell people what's going on. But as Mary just pointed out, tie everything you're doing to purpose, even if it's some of the most difficult decisions about eliminating positions or about eliminating services, is tying that decision to the purpose of your department, the purpose of your organization, the purpose of the county, and to consider that in the decisions that you're going to make. Because these are going to be some of the most difficult things that you're going to do in your career, are the things you've been doing for the last couple months, and the things those of us serving our communities are going to have to be doing in the next year or two.
Yeah, I just want to thank all of you who are on the front lines. My hat's off to all of you. These are very difficult times, and you're doing really important work. If nobody tells you that every day, they should. So thank you.
Yeah, you are serving your communities in all the roles that you do. And we hope that some of the tools we shared today, some of the insights we shared today, help you do that even better. Thank you, good luck, and stay well.
Thanks, folks.